For centuries, historians have spoken of the fall of empires as if collapse were a slow, predictable decay. But around 1200 BCE, something far more violent swept across the ancient world, a storm of fire and steel that nearly erased civilization itself. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to ash. Trade routes that connected continents vanished. Kingdoms that once commanded vast armies disappeared almost overnight. And at the center of this chaos was a name carved into stone by terrified survivors: the Sea Peoples. Who were they? Where did they come from? And how did a mysterious confederation of warriors almost bring the Bronze Age world to its knees? To understand the threat, we must first picture the world they attacked. In the 13th century BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean was a thriving network of powerful states. The empire of the ancient Egypt ruled the Nile with monumental authority. The Hittite Empire controlled much of Anatolia and northern Syria. The Mycenaean Greece dominated the Aegean. The wealthy port city of Ugarit thrived as a hub of international trade. Copper from Cyprus, tin from distant lands, grain from Egypt, luxury goods flowing between royal courts. It was a globalized world, interconnected, sophisticated, and confident in its permanence. Then, in the span of a few decades, it unraveled. Palaces burned, writing systems vanished, entire populations fled, and the attackers left almost no record of who they were. Our primary evidence comes from Egypt, specifically from inscriptions commissioned by Pharaoh Ramesses III. On the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, dramatic reliefs depict a massive invasion. Ships packed with warriors, ox-drawn carts carrying women and children, fighters with horned helmets and round shields. A migrating people, not merely raiders, but entire communities on the move. The inscriptions name them collectively as foreign invaders from the islands in the midst of the sea. They were not one tribe, they were a coalition. The texts list names that have echoed through history: Shurden, Shekelesh, Danayan, Cheker, Peliset. Together, they are what modern scholars call the Sea Peoples. But here is the unsettling detail. Even the Egyptians, masters of record-keeping, did not seem to know exactly who these enemies were. They appeared suddenly, and they struck everywhere. Archaeology reveals a pattern too consistent to ignore. Around 1200 BCE, destruction layers appear across the Mediterranean. The great Hittite capital of Hattusa was abandoned and burned. The once prosperous port of Ugarit was destroyed so completely that letters were found still baking in kilns, never delivered. Mycenaean palace centers such as Mycenae and Pylos fell into ruin. And then there is Cyprus, a key supplier of copper. Its cities were attacked repeatedly. It was not a single isolated war. It was systemic collapse. Some cities show signs of siege. Others appear to have been abandoned in panic. In some regions, fortifications were hastily expanded, as if leaders knew something catastrophic was coming, but they could not stop it. The most vivid account comes from the reign of Ramesses III. According to his inscriptions, the Sea Peoples had already destroyed powerful kingdoms to the north before turning toward Egypt. He writes that no land could stand before their arms, not the Hittites, not Carchemish, not Arzawa, not Alashia, that is Cyprus. It reads like a list of fallen giants. Then they came for the Nile. But Egypt was ready. Reliefs at Medinet Habu show one of history's earliest recorded naval battles. Egyptian ships ram the invaders. Archers fire volleys of arrows into crowded decks. Warriors tumble into the sea. On land, Egyptian forces confront wagons carrying families, evidence that this was not just a raid, but a migration. Ramesses III claims total victory. The Sea Peoples were defeated. Egypt was saved, but the triumph feels hollow. Within decades, Egypt itself entered a period of decline. The centralized power of the new kingdom weakened. Economic strain deepened. The age of imperial Egypt began to fade. Even in victory, something had changed. The term Sea Peoples conjures images of ruthless maritime raiders. But the carvings at Medinet Habu complicate that narrative. They show women, children, ox carts loaded with possessions, entire communities on the move. This suggests something more than piracy. Some scholars argue the Sea Peoples were displaced populations, refugees driven from their homelands by famine, drought, earthquakes, or political collapse. Climate studies indicate that the late Bronze Age experienced significant drought in parts of the eastern Mediterranean. Crop failures may have triggered mass migration. Earthquakes, part of what some call a seismic storm, may have weakened cities before invasion. In this theory, the Sea Peoples were not the original cause of collapse. They were a symptom, a final wave in a cascading disaster. But that explanation leaves questions unanswered. Why were they so militarized? How did they coordinate attacks across such vast distances? And why do their cultural traces appear in multiple regions simultaneously? One group among the Sea Peoples stands out, the Peliset. Many scholars identify them with the Philistines of the Hebrew Bible. Archaeological evidence in the southern Levant, particularly in cities like Ashkelon and Ashdod, reveals material culture that appears suddenly around 1175 BCE. Pottery styles closely resemble those from the Aegean world. DNA analysis of ancient remains from Ashkelon suggests a genetic influx from southern Europe during this period. Could the Philistines have been migrants from the Aegean? If so, were they remnants of the collapsing Mycenaean world, displaced warriors seeking new lands? The possibility reshapes the narrative. The Sea Peoples may not have been a single ethnic group, but a coalition of fractured societies, united by necessity, hardened by upheaval. One of the most haunting consequences of the Bronze Age collapse was the sudden disappearance of writing systems. In Mycenaean Greece, linear B script vanished. In Anatolia, Hittite cuneiform disappeared. In many regions, literacy itself faded for centuries. This was not merely political change, it was cultural amnesia. Trade networks dissolved. Bureaucracies crumbled. Knowledge was lost. The interconnected world of the late Bronze Age fragmented into isolated, struggling communities. Some historians call it the first Dark Age, and the Sea Peoples stand at its threshold. Despite decades of research, no definitive homeland has been identified. Some theories place their origins in the Aegean. Others suggest Western Anatolia. Still others propose central Mediterranean regions such as Sardinia or Sicily. The Shurden, for example, are sometimes linked to Sardinia due to similarities between Egyptian depictions of horned helmets and later Nuragic warrior statues. But similarities are not proof. No inscription left by the Sea Peoples themselves has ever been found. No city clearly identified as their capital. No unified language preserved. It is as if they emerged from the sea and then dissolved back into history. Increasingly, Scholars view the Bronze Age collapse not as a single cause event, but as a perfect storm. Climate change, famine, internal rebellions, economic overextension, earthquakes, and external invasion. In such a fragile system, even a relatively small but mobile coalition of warriors could trigger catastrophic chain reactions. Trade routes disrupted, cities starve, allies fall, borders weaken, refugees move, conflict spreads. The Sea Peoples may have been the spark that ignited a world already soaked in oil, but the mystery remains. How did they coordinate simultaneous assaults across multiple empires? Was there leadership, a charismatic warlord, a shared identity, or was it a loose confederation driven by survival? By 1100 BCE, the world looked radically different. The Hittite Empire was gone. Mycenaean palace culture had collapsed. Egypt had retreated into isolation. The old international order, once maintained by diplomacy, royal marriages, and trade, was finished. In its place arose smaller kingdoms. Iron technology began to spread. New cultures emerged from the ashes. It was not the end of civilization, but it was the end of a world. And at its violent turning point were the Sea Peoples. Why they still haunt history. Few ancient groups inspire as much debate. Some see them as marauders, opportunistic destroyers who exploited weakness. Others see them as climate refugees, victims as much as aggressors. Still others argue that the term Sea Peoples oversimplifies a far more complex transformation, a centuries-long unraveling of interconnected systems. But perhaps what fascinates us most is how close the ancient world came to total collapse. Had Egypt fallen completely? Had Mesopotamian states vanished? Had recovery not followed? The trajectory of human history might have been entirely different. The Sea Peoples remind us how fragile complex systems can be, how quickly prosperity can turn to ash, how civilizations that appear invincible can fall within a single generation. A mystery, without a final chapter. Unlike the tombs of pharaohs or the ruins of fallen capitals, the Sea Peoples left no monument bearing their own story. They are known only through the fear of their enemies, through burned cities, through scattered artifacts, through carved reliefs of ships locked in combat. They are both historical and elusive, real enough to reshape the Mediterranean, yet mysterious enough to evade certainty. Were they conquerors? Survivors? A coalition born from catastrophe? Or the final wave in a collapse already underway? More than 3,000 years later, we are still piecing together fragments, pottery shards, charred beams, inscriptions half erased by time. And like the ancient scribes who first carved their warning into stone, we are left with questions. Did the Sea Peoples destroy civilization? Or did they merely reveal how vulnerable it always was? The Bronze Age world believed itself eternal. Its kings built in stone. Its merchants traded across oceans. Its scribes recorded treaties meant to last forever. And then, in a generation, it nearly vanished. The Sea Peoples remain a shadow at the edge of that catastrophe, a reminder that history is not a straight line. It is a tide, and sometimes the tide rises without warning. What do you think? Were the Sea Peoples ruthless invaders who nearly erased civilization, or desperate migrants caught in the collapse of their own world? The mystery endures.